They called it their forever home. Margot never put their names on the deed. 12 years of borrowed walls, staged lies, and quiet disrespect, paid in silence. By morning, the house was listed. The trust updated. Whitney's name vanished from every document she once posed beside. Margot didn't argue. She didn't explain. She just let the paperwork finish the sentence. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Family dinner at a high-end restaurant to celebrate Whitney's brand relaunch. The lighting was soft, the kind designed to flatter skin and dim down tension. Candlelight flickered across the surface of polished crystal glasses. The leather banquettes at Mariner and Finch whispered old money, sea bass and champagne foam, white truffle risotto, voices low and careful. Whitney's laugh rang a little louder than necessary. She was glowing, flawless in a satin cream wrap dress, hair blown out into beachy waves that looked expensive and accidental. Her freshly rebranded beauty line had just gone live that morning with a full feature in Vanity Fair. The waiter had already topped off her glass twice. To reinvention, she said, lifting her flute. To grace, power, and second chances. Everyone raised their glasses. Murmuring variations of "To Whitney," she beamed. "And I just hope I age gracefully." Her eyes locked like lasers on Margot across the table. Unlike some people. A pause. Then came the polite, low ripple of laughter. Not loud, not real, but enough to gloss it over. Trey, seated beside Margot, took a slow sip of wine and said nothing. His silence was the kind you could mistake for peace if you didn't know better. Margot dabbed her mouth with the linen napkin, folding it carefully. "Indeed," she said, tone arid as a Nevada summer. Emily, Whitney's teenage daughter, shifted uncomfortably. "That was nasty," she whispered under her breath, just loud enough for Victor to hear. He shot her a glance, not of correction, but recognition. Victor's phone vibrated once under the table. He ignored it. The next course arrived. Chateaubriand, carved tableside, and for a moment the performance reset. Cutlery clinked, napkins refolded. The illusion of a family, intact. Victor finally looked at his phone. A text from Margot. "You still own the deed, right?" His thumb hovered over the screen, his jaw tightening just slightly. He lifted his eyes across the table to meet hers. Margot's face was perfectly still. She picked up her wine glass like she was holding a loaded gun. Trey caught the glance. He didn't speak, but a slight furrow creased between his brows. "Emily," Whitney said suddenly, pushing the air back into the room. "You haven't even touched your beef. Don't tell me you're doing that vegan thing again." Emily blinked. "I'm just not that hungry." "Well, at least pretend. This place is $300 a head." Victor leaned in, eyes still locked on his phone screen. "She's fine. Whit." "I wasn't talking to you, Victor," Whitney snapped, then smiled too quickly. "But thank you for your brotherly concern." Another pause, deeper this time. No one laughed. Victor slowly set down his phone. No reply to Margot. Just yet. Trey finally spoke, voice low. "Let's not ruin the dinner, huh?" Whitney turned to him, a glint in her eye. "Oh, honey, who's ruining it?" Margot's laugh this time was not polite. The house sat on the screen like a smug lie. Margot leaned back in her office chair, the oak armrests worn smooth from years of late-night contract reviews and solo dinners. On her monitor, a paused Instagram reel. Whitney, barefoot in wide-leg linen pants, twirling through the sun-drenched foyer like she owned the air. "Welcome to our home, our forever space." Margot hit mute. She clicked away from the video and pulled up the file folder she'd labeled simply 103 Preston. Scanned PDFs loaded one by one. Deed, home inspection, tax history, and a refinance offer that had never gone through. Every document bore her name, Margot Elise Warner. Not a trace of Whitney, not even Trey. She hadn't thought twice about keeping it in her name when they'd all been scraping by. Back then, Trey was sleeping in his car after the market crashed, and Whitney had still been selling off knockoff lip kits out of a storage unit in Van Nuys. Margot had the credit, the cash, the stability. They had a sob story and 2 suitcases. She took them in, gave them keys, and apparently gave them amnesia. A quiet knock. Lena stepped inside holding a mug of something herbal. It's after midnight. Margot didn't glance up. She posted a house tour. Lena set the mug down beside her. Of course she did. She called it her estate. Lena blinked. Did she now? Margot clicked through the documents again, slower this time. The scanned deed was dated 7 years back, notarized and clean. The title history showed no transfers, no liens. She double-checked the property tax statements, auto-paid under her business account. Everything legally flawless, everything hers. She never asked to buy in, Margot said flatly, never offered. Just moved in, redecorated, and started calling it hers. Lena ran a hand through her short salt and pepper curls. You're legally clear. Then, more gently. Emotionally, too? Margot turned to face her. Crystal. Lena didn't press. She just sipped the tea she brought for Margot instead. That's how you stay married 26 years. You learn to ask the real question once. The room fell into a quiet rhythm, just the hum of Margot's dual monitors and the soft creak of old hardwood beneath Lena's feet. Then a voice broke the silence. Did you see the part where she called the guest wing the bridal suite? Emily stood in the doorway, arms crossed, phone in hand. She didn't look like a kid anymore. She looked tired. Eyes rimmed in the kind of maturity you earn when you grow up watching two people rewrite history in front of you. Margot gave a small smile. Missed that detail. Emily walked in and slumped into the reading chair by the window. She's already picked out where the fountain's going. Says it's going to be Versailles vibes. Lena raised an eyebrow. Christ, Emily huffed. She won't shut up about our land, like she bought a ranch and wrestled a deed from the ground herself. Margot folded the laptop closed, stood, walked over to the sideboard where her real estate license hung beside a framed photo of her late father, also a broker. Back when things were closed with a handshake and a promise. She tapped the frame. Then she'll be surprised when it's listed. Emily stared. You're serious? Margot looked at her, calm as ever. Very. The broker Margot hired didn't advertise. No bus bench face, no digital flyers, no open house signs ballooning on street corners. She specialized in discreet transitions, divorce, offshore exits, corporate quiet exits. Her card was matte black with embossed silver initials, K.C. Bennett, confidential real estate. They met in Margot's law office after hours. Lena kept the lights low and the blinds drawn. I want the house sold, Margot said plainly. No sign, no photos, no neighbors knowing until after escrow closes. Casey didn't blink. You want it marketed as a pocket listing? I want it marketed as gone. Casey nodded. You'll have showings? Margot opened a folder. Only when they're both out. Victor made it work. Of course he did. He had Trey's work schedule memorized. Engineering site visits, team lunches, the weekly Wednesday happy hour that was more venting than drinking. Whitney's was easier. She broadcast her entire itinerary on Instagram. Day starts with Pilates. Then I'm meeting a lighting designer for the Wine Nook reveal. Stay tuned, Victor texted Margot the moment she drove off. Go time. Within 6 days, 3 buyers toured the house. Margot was never there. Emily was. She moved with quiet precision, packing away Whitney's curated shelf of faux memoirs, hiding the framed press clippings from local beauty awards, rolling up the branded throw blanket that said C. Claire Estate in champagne script. Let's make it look lived in, she told Lena, by someone else. They swapped out the scent diffusers, replaced Whitney's peach vanilla fog with clean sandalwood. Emily even restyled the coffee table with real books, Eudora Welty, Vonnegut, Baldwin, and left a pair of tortoiseshell reading glasses angled just so. By the end of the week, the house looked warmer, less manicured, more expensive, more Margot. Whitney uploaded a new video that Friday, hair in rollers, glass of wine in hand. She floated through the foyer. Grace is in the details of your forever home, she said, running a manicured nail down the custom molding she never paid for. Margot watched from her phone as she stood in the lobby of Victor's office. Her reflection in the chrome elevator door was unreadable. Victor emerged a minute later, holding a slim file folder. They loved it. All 3. Favorites? He grinned. 2 full-price offers, one of them cash. Margot exhaled, slow and measured. Victor flipped the folder open. The cash buyer wants a quick close. Inspection waived. 3-week escrow. Margot raised a brow. God bless desperation. Victor closed the folder, face sobering. You sure you don't want to tell them? I'm sure. They'll find out eventually. They always do. He didn't push, just nodded once and stepped back to his desk, leaving her alone in the quiet. That night, Margot returned to the house, not for sentiment, not to say goodbye, but to check the thermostat and make sure no staging candles had been left burning. She walked through the foyer, hearing echoes in the corners, everything Whitney had tried to claim, the faux antique console, the quartz chandelier, the hand-painted ceramic basin in the guest bath. None of it mattered. Ownership wasn't about touch. It was about title. She stood in the center of the living room. No makeup. Hair pinned back. The silence here wasn't oppressive. It was clean. She smiled. Then her phone buzzed. Text from Lena. She just went live. Margot clicked the link. Whitney, filming from the master bath, spun toward the mirror with a satin robe tied just so. This is where I do my nighttime skincare, she cooed to her followers. Every detail in this house was chosen with love. From the marble to the mirrors, it's my dream. Margot watched her reflection, tilted chin, rehearsed joy, the lie spun like silk. She held the phone steady and hit record. This house was never hers, she said quietly, but the sale will be. The knock came just before dusk. Margot didn't flinch. She'd seen the black Range Rover crawl down the gravel drive 10 minutes ago, like a panther out of place. City polish on country dirt. She'd already brewed the coffee, already set out a manila folder on the dining table. The lake outside the window was flat and dark and waiting. She opened the door. Trey stepped in first, still wearing the jacket from work, sweat at the collar. Whitney followed, in sunglasses despite the fading light, mouth pressed tight like she was holding in something acidic. Victor stood behind them on the porch. He didn't ask to come in, just crossed his arms. Margot didn't offer seats. She simply walked back to the table and sat. They followed. Trey didn't bother with pleasantries. You're selling our house? Margot's fingers tapped once on the folder before flipping it open. No, I'm selling my house. His jaw flexed. You're out of your damn mind. Whitney peeled off her sunglasses slowly, placing them on the table like she was laying down a weapon. We put so much money into that place. New fixtures, built-ins. Trey redid the entire backyard himself. Margot turned the folder toward them. At the top, the deed, notarized. Below, the mortgage file, the taxes, all with her name alone. You put money in, she said coolly, but it wasn't an investment. You never asked to be on title, never requested a percentage. You spent money because you lived there. That's called contributing to your lifestyle, not ownership, Whitney scoffed. That's bullshit. You can't just erase us. Margot met her eyes. You were never written in. Trey slammed a palm down on the table. This isn't just real estate, Margot. This is our home. You knew we loved that house. She didn't flinch. You loved a house. I owned it. A silence opened, thick, tight, ugly. Victor finally stepped forward into the room. She's not evicting you, he said gently. She's just moving forward. The buyers close next week. She gave you notice out of courtesy. Whitney let out a humorless laugh. Courtesy? Is that what this is? Margot's voice was quieter now, but harder. You want grace? It's letting you pack instead of locking you out. Trey shook his head, pacing now. So what? You just decided to nuke everything because you're bitter? Margot stood. The room shifted with her. I gave you a home when you had nothing, she said. I kept it in my name to protect it. You moved in. You settled. You branded it like a product. Called it ours so often you forgot it wasn't. And now, because I'm finally choosing myself, you want to play the victim? Whitney's eyes narrowed. You always did love control. No, Margot said softly. I love boundaries. You two just ignored every single one of them. Outside, the wind moved across the lake in a sudden hush, like the water was listening. Victor cleared his throat. They've got 9 days. Margot nodded. That's more than fair. Trey looked like he wanted to say something else, to throw one last match, but Whitney stood up. This isn't over, she said. Margot tilted her head. It never really started. Margot barely had time to finish her coffee before Mrs. Bramble showed up. She didn't knock. She rang, twice in sharp succession, then let herself into the garden gate, like she had clearance from God and the city planner. Margot was in the backyard, pruning back late roses near the trellis. She didn't look up right away. "Margot, dear," Mrs. Bramble called, already irritated and winded. "Do you have a moment? Something pressing." Margot clipped one more stem before turning. Always a moment for pressing matters. Mrs. Bramble stood on the flagstone path in a salmon twinset and orthopedic sandals. Her visor was leopard print, but her mouth was all business. "You're selling 103 Preston." It wasn't a question. Margot removed her gardening gloves. "I am." The woman's lips thinned into a line so tight it could slice granite. "It will lower comps. We're still trying to recover from the Rothschild foreclosure on Covewood. Another off-market sale will only—" She paused for effect. "Destabilize the neighborhood metrics." Margot tilted her head slightly. Metrics or control? Mrs. Bramble's nostrils flared. "There are people concerned, troubled. They're worried about perception, about what Whitney might say. She's vocal. I've noticed. She's threatening to go public. Tell her followers how she's being forced out of her own home. That language could be very damaging. To all of us." Margot let out a soft breath. "You mean to your property values?" "Well," Mrs. Bramble sniffed, "we are the board, Margot. We represent the best interests of the community." "No," Margot said, calm and clear. "You represent your own comfort, and gossip disguised as concern." Mrs. Bramble's cheeks flushed. "This isn't personal." "Everything's personal when you live this close together." Before Mrs. Bramble could answer, Lena appeared from the kitchen with a pitcher of lemon verbena iced tea and a tray of glasses. Emily followed, barefoot and relaxed, carrying a small bowl of sugared pecans. They didn't rush, they didn't greet. They simply settled into the garden table like it was theirs, and it was. Mrs. Bramble's eyes flicked between them, then back to Margot. "I'm simply asking, could you delay? Just a little. Give them more time." Margot moved to the table and poured herself a glass. "They had 12 years of time," she said, "and they spent it calling what wasn't theirs home." Mrs. Bramble opened her mouth, then closed it. Lena looked over, voice warm but iron-edged. "Would you like some tea, Mildred?" The use of her first name landed like a tack under a heel. "No," Mrs. Bramble said sharply, straightening her visor. "No, thank you. I can see I've overstepped." Margot smiled. "Not for the first time." The older woman bristled, turned, and exited the garden with military stiffness. The gate clicked shut with a sound that felt like punctuation. Silence settled, soft but alive. Emily popped a pecan into her mouth. "You know she's going to email the entire neighborhood." "She already did," Lena said, checking her phone. Subject line, urgent development concerning Preston sale. Margot sipped her tea. "Let them worry." Emily glanced at her. "What if Whitney does post something? She keeps teasing a betrayal reveal. People love her brand." "They love the illusion of her brand," Margot said, folding one leg over the other. "She sells candles and curated trauma. Nothing I haven't seen before." Lena raised a brow. "What happens if she does go nuclear?" Margot's voice didn't waver. "Then we stop pretending there was ever peace to preserve." The video dropped at noon. Whitney called it "When Home Isn't Safe, My Truth," a title designed to sting and trend in equal measure. She filmed it in soft lighting from the now empty master bedroom, the walls behind her staged to look minimalist but not cold. A flickering candle and an oversized hoodie lent the illusion of vulnerability. The makeup said otherwise. "This has been the hardest chapter of my life," she began, voice low and breathy. "I opened my home to people I loved. I built my dreams there. And now, I'm being pushed out, not for money, not for any real reason. Just bitterness, jealousy, control." The camera cut closer, framing only her face. "She was like family. I thought we were forever. And now she's sold the house out from under us. No conversation, no humanity." Then came the tears, perfectly paced. "Please, just send prayers, for healing, for justice." She pressed her hand to her chest. Fade to soft piano. It went up on her feed in stories, cross-posted to her lifestyle channel, her backup page, her Candlelines blog. Within 45 minutes, it had 12,000 views and hundreds of comments. But the sympathy didn't hold. First came the polite questions. Wait, I thought you didn't own that place? Then the screenshots, photos from HOA newsletters over the years, flyers with Margot's name listed under Community Chair, Beautification Fundraiser, links to a GoFundMe Margot started for a neighbor's cancer treatment, archived pictures from the annual winter walk, where Margot was dressed as Mrs. Claus for the kids, Whitney nowhere in sight. Then came the emails. One by one, longtime neighbors, people who hadn't spoken up during the quiet years, started replying, not to Whitney. To each other. Group chats lit up. Forwarded emails rolled in. The neighborhood listserv filled with old photos, notes from Margot, receipts, memories. Someone even posted the original property record. 103 Preston, sole owner, Margot Elise Warner. Margot said nothing. She didn't log on, didn't reply, didn't correct or clap back. She brewed a pot of dark roast, watered the orchids, took her daily walk with Lena and the dog. She moved like the storm was outside, and she was already dry. Emily scrolled through the comment section from the breakfast table. She keeps refreshing the post, she said. You can tell, the captions keep changing. First it was about betrayal. Then, the system failed her. Now it's about mental health. She's fishing, Lena said. She's drowning, Margot corrected, folding her napkin. Emily set her phone down and looked at her aunt with something deeper than admiration. Your silence is louder than her filter. Margot smiled gently. Noise is her only currency. When it stops buying her sympathy, she goes bankrupt. Victor arrived an hour later in jeans and a windbreaker, carrying a sealed envelope and 2 folders. It's done, he said simply. Finalized this morning. Funds transferred. Deeds signed. The house is no longer yours. Margot nodded. And not hers, either. Escrow held up. Move-out deadline is 30 days. That's more grace than she gave me at dinner, Margot said, without looking up. Victor paused. She's not going to take this well. She hasn't taken anything well in years. He handed over the envelope. Copy of the closing. Want me to deliver theirs? No, mail it. Let the mailbox do the talking. Victor gave a short nod, then hesitated. You know this doesn't stop here. Margot finally looked at him. Nothing important ever does. Trey came alone. No Range Rover, no sunglasses, no script. Just his old sedan. The same one he'd bought used before the layoffs, parked crooked at the edge of Margot's gravel drive. He didn't text, didn't call. He simply stood at her door, hat in hand, like the years had finally stripped him of every good excuse. Margot opened it halfway. Whitney send you? No, he said quietly. She doesn't know I'm here. She studied him for a beat, then stepped aside. Then come in. The lake house felt smaller in the late afternoon light. Dust motes moved in lazy orbits through the air, catching the slant of sun across the wooden floor. The scent of lemon polish lingered. Lena had gone to town earlier, leaving Margot with her thoughts and her tea. Trey sat at the edge of the couch, elbows on knees, eyes tracing everything except her. I saw the video, he said. Everyone did. She's spiraling. Margot set down her cup. You think I don't know that? He winced. I'm not defending her. That's new. A flicker crossed his face. Guilt, old and sharp. He stopped, exhaled. I thought you didn't mind. The little digs, the jokes, you never said anything. Margot tilted her head, eyes steady. Silence isn't consent, Trey. It's observation. He swallowed hard. You always were the observer. I had to be. Someone in the family needed to watch the fire before it spread. Trey's hands clenched together. I thought she was harmless. I thought the way she talked about you, well, I told myself it was just insecurity. It was projection, Margot said. And you mistook it for personality. He nodded, eyes on the floor. Yeah, I did. They sat there for a long stretch, the lake wind tapping lightly against the windows. Margot didn't fill the silence. She learned that truth crawls out only when you stop rescuing people from their own pauses. Finally, he spoke again. When I moved in, after everything went south, you told me it was temporary, that you'd help me get back on my feet. And I did. You did, he said. But then Whitney happened. She said we could make it a home, that we'd fix it up, repay you later. I thought that meant something. It did, Margot said softly. It meant you needed somewhere safe, not somewhere to steal. He looked up then, really looked at her. I never meant to take anything from you. You didn't. You just let her take credit for what you both were given. Trey rubbed his hands together, the sound dry and small. She told people it was her legacy, that she built it, that we built it. And you didn't correct her. His shoulders slumped. I didn't want the fight. That's not peace, Margot said. That's neglect wearing a polite face. He gave a hollow laugh. Guess I'm my father's son. Margot didn't answer that. Some truths didn't need her help landing. He leaned back, exhausted in a way that came from more than sleepless nights. I don't blame you for selling, you know. I think deep down I knew it wasn't ours. I just let the fantasy feel real for a while. That's what fantasy does, she said. It lets you borrow comfort, until the bill comes due. He nodded slowly. She keeps saying you destroyed her dream. Margot looked out the window toward the rippling water. Dreams built on delusion tend to collapse on schedule. He was quiet. Then, after a moment, what happens now? Now, Margot said. You pack, you move, you start living like your name's on your own mailbox again. Trey smiled faintly. And you? You just go back to pruning roses? I go back to my life, she said. The one I built without stealing anyone else's narrative. He let that sit. The air between them softened, not with forgiveness, but with the quiet recognition that something heavy had finally been set down. Trey stood, hands in his pockets. I don't deserve it, but thank you for not locking us out. Margot's gaze lifted. You're right, you don't. He gave a small nod, turned toward the door, and paused. I never saw the room, he said. Margot frowned. What room? The guest room, the one you said was for me when I got back on my feet. I never stepped in there, not once. Margot's lips curved faintly. You should see it before you go. He hesitated, then followed her down the hallway. She opened the door. The room was simple, bare walls, folded quilts, sunlight spilling across the bedspread. But in the corner stood a stack of boxes, neatly labeled with his name. Old photos, his tools, letters, all the things Whitney had said she couldn't find. He blinked. You kept them. I keep records, she said, of what's real. The envelope was thick, ivory, and embossed with Victor's firm's insignia. Margot had tucked it under Emily's breakfast plate, like it was just another piece of mail. But when Emily lifted the plate, saw the gold seal, her breath caught. She held it up. Is this what I think it is? Margot poured herself a second cup of coffee. Open it. The morning light streamed through the kitchen's open windows, cool and quiet. Outside, birds made sharp, efficient sounds. Inside, time slowed. Emily cracked the seal and unfolded the packet with careful hands. Her eyes moved line by line, faster at first, then slower as the shape of it became clear. Her voice, when it came, was small. You changed your trust. I updated it, Margot corrected gently. There's a difference. All of it, Emily's voice trailed. The house, the lake property, the stocks, everything. Everything that mattered, Margot said. Emily flipped the page. My name's here, not just once. It's all over this. Yes. Emily blinked down at the document. And Trey? Bypassed entirely. And Whitney? Margot's expression didn't flicker. Doesn't exist in my records. Victor arrived 10 minutes later with his briefcase and a quiet confidence. He slid into the chair across from Emily and laid a matching set of documents on the table. It's tight, he said, tapping the pages. Clear as crystal. The new clause structure isn't just updated, it's fortified. Everything's in trust. No probate, no loopholes, not even a whisper of challenge. Emily looked at him. She's going to try. She can try, Victor said. But she'll lose? She'll spin it, Emily said. Tell everyone she was supposed to inherit, that you tricked her, that I stole it. Margot took a sip of coffee. She's been spinning things for a decade. That's not inheritance. That's habit. Victor pushed a second copy across the table toward Emily. You're the sole beneficiary, Em. Executor, too. It's airtight. You won't need to fight because she'll have nothing to stand on. Emily stared down at the papers. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Margot said. You just have to live in truth. That's the only repayment I want. But what if I don't deserve it? Emily asked. Margot's eyes softened. Then earn it, day by day. Lena entered just as the conversation settled, wiping flour off her hands with a tea towel. She glanced at the papers, then looked at Margot. You sure? I'm not doing this to punish, Margot said. I'm doing it to preserve. Lena leaned against the counter. Still, it's a big shift. Margot looked out the window. So was bearing my name under theirs for 12 years. Emily set the papers down, her voice suddenly careful. What made you change it now? Margot paused. You remember the lake storm 3 years ago, the one that knocked out power for almost 2 days? Sure, Emily said. The generator failed. We lit candles, made soup on the camp stove. That night, Margot said slowly, Trey and Whitney left. They didn't even ask, just packed bags, took the rover, and drove to the hotel in town. Emily nodded, frowning. You stayed, Margot said. You sat with me and Lena in the dark, played cards, watched the water. That's when I knew. Knew what? That you'd never leave a hard room just because it got uncomfortable. Victor closed his briefcase, the metal clasp snapping shut. I'll file this today. Certified copies go out tomorrow. Thank you, Margot said. He gave her a long look. You're not worried about Trey? I've already had the real conversation with him, Margot said. The rest is just paperwork. And Whitney? She'll think she's been erased, Margot said. But the truth is, she was never written in. Victor nodded slowly, then looked toward Emily. Call me if she shows up at your door. Emily raised a brow. What do I do if she does? Victor smirked. Read her the part where she gets nothing. After Victor left, Lena made tea, and Emily sat on the porch with the documents still in her lap. The breeze smelled like pine and distant lake water. You know, Emily said, most people rewrite their will after someone dies. Margot joined her on the steps, cup in hand. I just stopped waiting for permission. Emily looked at her, then down at the page again. She's going to lose it. She already did, Margot said. She just hasn't accepted the terms yet. Lena laid the file down like it was a loaded weapon. Inside, physician statements, 2 neuropsych evals, a notarized affidavit from Margot's primary care doctor, and a video recording of her reading aloud from the trust revisions, sharp and composed, time-stamped and witnessed. She's clean, Lena said flatly. No sign of cognitive decline. No coercion, no vulnerability language. Victor scanned the top pages and gave a low whistle. This is surgical. I'm not letting that woman suggest Margot isn't of sound mind, Lena said, folding her arms. Not after everything she put her through. Victor didn't argue. He just tucked the file into his briefcase with deliberate care. Later that afternoon, Trey showed up at Lena's studio. No call. Just the soft knock of a man who didn't know what he was still allowed to ask for. Lena opened the door, but didn't invite him in. Trey stayed on the porch, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. His face was worn, like someone who hadn't slept in days, but unlike before, he didn't lead with excuses. We don't want a public fight, he said, his voice lower than usual. Whitney's pushing to contest the will. Says it's manipulation, that Margot's been pressured. Lena didn't blink. She thinks this is some Netflix doc, that we're out here forging papers and brainwashing an estate attorney? I told her it won't work, Trey said. But she's emotional and loud. Then walk away, Lena said. Walk now, and maybe keep the sliver of dignity you haven't handed over. She thinks there's money to be found. There is, Lena said, voice clipped. And every penny is accounted for. Nothing's hidden, just locked away from the person who didn't earn it. Trey looked down at his shoes. She'll never stop. Lena leaned forward. Then neither will we. Whitney's next move came, of course, through Instagram. A story, grainy, dimly lit, just her hand stirring a teacup. The caption, some people steal from family and call it justice. I call it betrayal. The next slide was a quote graphic. A legacy stolen is a curse passed on. It landed like a dull thud. Not the explosion she hoped for. The comments, at first supportive, started turning faster than usual. Didn't she buy you a car last year? Pretty sure the house was never in your name, babe. Girl, you posted pics of Margot's will like it was your birthright. Aren't you selling a candle called Humble for $48 right now? Whitney deleted the entire story within the hour. But the internet didn't forget. Screenshots spread. Snark followed. Emily found it all before breakfast. She held up her phone at the kitchen table. She's really doing this, quoting generational trauma posts while trying to sue us? Margot didn't even glance at the screen. That's Whitney, always rewriting the script halfway through the show. She thinks she's the protagonist. She thinks noise is the same as truth. Emily shook her head. I hate that she's still getting attention. She's not getting respect, Lena said. That's the difference. Emily stared down at the screen. I should say something. Just one post. Call her out. Make her stop. No, Margot said gently. That's not your job. She's my mother. She's a brand with your face on it. Emily exhaled, slow and tight. Then her voice dropped to a whisper. Mom, stop embarrassing yourself. Margot reached over, took the phone, and powered it down. Let her scream into a room full of exits, she said. You stay where the air is clean. The vote wasn't public. It didn't need to be. When Mrs. Bramble stepped down, citing exhaustion and a need to spend more time at the lake house in Vermont, no one protested. No applause, no cards or casseroles. The board quietly shifted, and the emails changed hands. There was no ceremony, no welcome meeting, just one agenda item cleared, then another. Margot's name appeared on the HOA letterhead, and no one dared call it temporary. She didn't issue statements, didn't promise transparency or renewal or reform. She just started working. The first change was policy. No external filming or influencer promotion without prior written approval. That clause hit like a velvet hammer. The neighbors didn't cheer, but privately, relief spread like spring thaw. Next came clarity, quarterly financial summaries, emailed and printed. HOA dues listed in plain language. No more buried costs. No more whispered conversations about missing landscaping invoices. Then, the legacy protections. All future deeds required verification of sole or shared ownership for home-related marketing and branding. No more calling something ours unless your name lived on paper. The neighborhood quieted in a new way, not because there was fear, but because order had returned. Margot sat on her porch one afternoon with Lena, sipping from a tall glass of mint tea, when Tom Kessler from 2 doors down wandered over. He wore a ball cap and squinted against the sun, like a man asking for something but too proud to phrase it that way. Hey, he said, lingering by the garden gate. Just wanted to say thanks. For? The board, the changes, the calm. We thought you were done with all this. Margot offered a half smile. I was. I just wasn't done waiting for my turn. Tom nodded. Well, you earned it. Lena looked at Margot after he left. That sounded like a man who once voted against you. Margot sipped her tea. It did, didn't it? Meanwhile, Emily had started commuting to Victor's office twice a week. She didn't wear power suits or heels, just clean slacks, her hair up, a notebook under one arm. She sat in on meetings quietly, took notes, ran errands, listened more than she spoke. Victor didn't coddle her. He challenged her. This clause, he said one day, pointing to a trust amendment she was reviewing. What's wrong with it? Emily studied it, then circled a vague phrase. It leaves room for interpretation. No contingency plan if the secondary beneficiary is unavailable. Victor smiled. That's better than half the paralegals here. Emily flushed. I'm still learning. That's what scares them, Victor said. You know enough to keep learning. Later, he handed her a slim binder. Her name was embossed on the corner. What's this? Your own project, he said. We'll walk it together. That night, back at the lake house, Emily curled up on the couch beside Margot. Victor said something weird today, she said. Margot raised an eyebrow. He said, the lively legacy lives on, just not how they expected. Margot stirred her tea. He's not wrong. They thought I'd carry her name, Emily said quietly, her brand, her damage. They thought I was the next generation of chaos. You're not, Margot said. Emily looked down. But I still carry her blood. Margot reached over and squeezed her hand. Blood is biology. Legacy is choice. The next morning, a new email went out from the HOA board. Subject line: clarified enforcement of residential privacy standards beneath it. In smaller print, Chairwoman Margot Elise Warner Whitney's rebrand began exactly 6 days after the failed will challenge. The caption on her latest post read, "Sometimes the universe strips you of everything so you can start again. Minimalist life journey begins now." The photo was staged in front of a nondescript rental, beige siding, faux shutters, a welcome mat that read "Grateful AF." She stood barefoot in the frame, one hand holding a chipped ceramic mug, the other tucked casually into the pocket of an oversized cardigan. Her followers didn't buy it. Minimalist? Girl, didn't you have 3 chandeliers in your guest bathroom? This looks like a hostage situation with good lighting. Your journey has Amazon drop-offs every day. Whitney disabled comments by sunset. Margot didn't respond. She didn't watch the videos, didn't scroll through the curated stories about letting go and shedding ego and finding peace in smaller spaces. She simply turned inward and toward the house she had nearly forgotten how to love. The lake cottage had been the one place untouched by Whitney's reach. Too far for her taste. Too modest for her Instagram. Too real. Margot stood in the center of the living room with a paint roller in hand. Emily beside her in an old hoodie and cutoffs, both barefoot on plastic tarps. The room smelled like lavender soap and primer. "You're sure about lilac gray?" Emily asked, eyeing the sample card one more time. "I was sure the moment you wrinkled your nose at it," Margot said, grinning. Emily laughed. "You're impossible. I'm earned." They worked in companionable silence, music humming low from an old speaker, brushes swishing in rhythm. By noon, they'd primed the entire back wall and moved on to sanding the coffee table that had sat in storage for years. Margot ran a hand across the grain. "Your grandfather built this with a cracked rib and a flat-blade screwdriver." Emily raised a brow. "Why?" "Because he said store-bought things forget who they belong to." Later that week, they dug out the raised herb beds along the fence line. Emily wore gloves 2 sizes too big, and Margot's knees cracked every time she crouched. But they didn't stop until basil, rosemary, and lemon thyme rooted in fresh soil. They labeled each with little wooden stakes, hand-painted in neat cursive. "We should plant lavender next," Emily said. "Only if you promise not to kill it," Margot teased. "I promise to try not to kill it." Victor stopped by unannounced that weekend, wearing jeans and carrying a paper bag full of scones. He stepped onto the porch, surveying the potted plants, the drying laundry, the faint smell of wood stain drifting through the screen door. "This place looks like a home again," he said. Margot handed him a glass of iced tea. It never stopped being one. It just needed to remember. Victor sat beside her in the wicker chair, watching Emily fuss with a crooked wind chime on the eaves. "That house was always Whitney's stage. This one's your story," Margot nodded. "She staged it for cameras. We're staging it for memory." He took a long sip. "Feels like the kind of place you pass on, not just sell." "That's the plan," she said. "No more borrowed spaces." That evening, Emily curled up beside Margot on the porch swing. The moon had just crested the treetops, casting soft silver on the lake's surface. Crickets chirped without hurry. "She's posting again," Emily said, without needing to say who. Margot didn't ask to see. "She's pretending it was all a choice, that she let go, that none of it hurt." "Let her," Margot said. "The people who matter already know the truth." Emily hesitated, then said quietly, "Do you think she ever loved me?" Margot didn't answer right away. She traced the rim of her teacup with one finger. "I think she loved the version of you that looked good in photos. And I think that's not your fault." Emily's throat tightened. "She made me feel like love had conditions." Margot looked her in the eye. "Then let's never make that mistake with the people we choose to keep." The envelope had been sitting on the windowsill for 3 days, its crisp edges catching the morning light, but Emily hadn't opened it. She'd held it in her hands every time she passed, tracing the return address, imagining the words inside. It wasn't fear that kept her from opening it. It was more the quiet weight of what the letter represented, what it would change. The East Coast postmark was unmistakable, the sort of letter that felt like a ticket to a different life. Margot didn't press her. She simply gave Emily the space to open it when she was ready. knowing it had to be on Emily's terms. That was always the way, wasn't it? Every step, every decision, Emily had earned her place at the table, and now Margot had learned to sit back and let her do the same with her future. Finally, on the fourth morning after it arrived, Emily slit the envelope with a butter knife and read it standing barefoot in the kitchen. She didn't make a sound as she moved through the lines. Her eyes flicked back and forth, absorbing the weight of the words. She stopped, frozen for a moment, before she let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The letter was a full ride. It was everything she'd worked for: the East Coast Visual Arts Program, a 4-year scholarship to a prestigious university, housing covered, tuition waived, the world opening up ahead of her like a canvas waiting to be filled. She didn't say anything at first. She just smiled, a soft, bittersweet smile that tugged at the edges of her heart. Margot had been watching, waiting for the moment, and when it came, she didn't need to ask. "Let me guess," she said, her voice soft but knowing. "New York," Emily nodded, the grin never leaving her face. "And a full ride." Margot crossed the kitchen in a few quiet steps and took the letter from her daughter's hands. She read it slowly, then looked back at Emily. Her eyes, for a split second, shimmered with emotion, something deeper than just pride. Something more fragile, like the moment itself could slip away if they weren't careful. This, Margot whispered, a slow smile spreading across her face, was always the point. Emily swallowed, the weight of the moment sinking in. "I don't know if I'm ready." Margot placed the letter down on the counter and moved closer to her. "No one ever is," she said quietly. "That's how you know you're ready enough." It wasn't a grand speech, nor was it a life-altering declaration. It was simple, just the truth of it. Margot had always known this was the endgame. She'd spent so many years protecting Emily, helping her find a way to heal and grow, and now, the next chapter was here. There was no need to hold on to her any longer. Margot had given her wings, and the rest was Emily's to claim. That afternoon, after the letter had been tucked away and the house felt quieter, Margot went to the kitchen and returned with a small, antique brass key. She held it out to Emily, the kind of key that had opened doors long before either of them knew how to appreciate the value of what was behind them. "This," Margot said, her voice soft but steady, "is for you. The lake house is now in your name." Emily took the key, her fingers curling around it. She wasn't sure what to say, but there was something grounding about the weight of it in her palm. She hadn't realized it until this moment, but that house had always been more than just a place to rest. It was the place where she had finally found herself, the place where the past had met the future and made peace with it. And now, it was hers. "Come back when you're tired," Margot added, "not trapped." Emily's throat tightened, and her eyes flicked up to meet Margot's. She stopped, unsure of what more she could say, but the words weren't necessary. There was a bond between them that hadn't required explanation in years. The quiet understanding settled between them, and just then, it felt like everything had shifted into its rightful place. Later that afternoon, as they worked together to finish the garden beds outside, Trey showed up. He was standing at the gate, holding a bouquet of flowers, looking a little unsure of himself, like he wasn't sure whether to knock or just walk in. Margot paused, her hand still on the trowel, but she didn't move. She wasn't going to ask him to leave, nor was she going to make it easy for him. Emily looked up at him from where she was kneeling, her expression unreadable. Trey stepped closer, the sun casting long shadows across the gravel driveway. "I heard," he began, his voice tight with something unspoken, "about the letter." Emily didn't respond right away. She just stared at him, the flowers in his hand suddenly looking like an awkward offering, something too much and too little at the same time. "I thought you might want these," Trey said, holding them out. Emily stood slowly, her movements careful, almost like she was considering whether to speak at all. Then, without a word, she stepped toward him and wrapped her arms around him in a quiet, brief hug. Trey's arms tightened around her, but there was nothing else to say. No grand reconciliation. No apology that could fill the years of absence and silence between them. When they pulled apart, Trey didn't say anything more. He simply set the flowers down on the porch railing and turned to walk away, leaving the door to the past firmly closed behind him. As the evening rolled in, Emily and Margot sat together on the porch swing. the sun slipping lower, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. There was no rush, no need to fill the space with words. They had reached the quiet part of their story, the part where nothing needed to be said to make it real. The breeze stirred the wind chimes in the distance, and the world moved on, the same but different, all at once. Whitney's post was vague, deliberately so, but the words were unmistakable to anyone who had been following her rise and fall. The text appeared on her blog at exactly 3:42 p.m., formatted as a cryptic narrative, one meant to spark sympathy without ever naming names. The problem with being a woman in this world is that we are never allowed to outgrow the people who've tried to shape us. We are forever shackled to the past, pulled back by the same hands that made us. Some of us are lucky enough to fight. Others are left with nothing but pieces of ourselves, scattered across other people's memories. But maybe, just maybe, it's time to take those pieces back. The post lingered at the top of her blog for an hour, gathering quick reactions. The comments began flowing in, a familiar mix of support and skepticism. There was the usual chorus of, "You've got this, Whitney," and "Stay strong, girl." But underneath that, there was a darker current. Comments like, "Who are you talking about? Not a fan of these vague posts. Don't air your dirty laundry if you're not going to name names. Girl, you act like you lost everything, but you chose your path. Be honest with your followers." One comment stood out, posted at 4:17 p.m. "The people you're talking about, the ones who shaped you? Funny how your followers forget about public records and legal documents." A series of attachments followed, scans of Margot's updated trust documents, along with a note that simply read, "There are no surprises here, just facts." The account that posted this comment was unverified, and the username was a jumble of numbers and letters, but the message was clear. It was a quiet declaration of war, aimed not just at Whitney, but at the version of her narrative that had begun to unravel in the public eye. Margot didn't respond. She'd seen the post. She'd read the comments, scrolled through the screenshots. She knew the game Whitney was playing. But Margot wasn't interested in playing anymore. The phone rang once, twice, then a third time. She ignored it. The same number each time. It was never Whitney herself. Margot knew that much. It was always someone else, the people who had their own stake in the story, who kept the myth of Whitney alive by feeding it. By 6 p.m., Margot had already turned off her phone. She walked into the kitchen, where Lena was pouring a glass of red wine, looking pensive. "Did you see it?" Lena asked, her voice calm but laced with concern. "I saw it," Margot replied, picking up the wine glass and taking a slow sip. "And?" "And nothing," Margot said, setting the glass down carefully. "She'll spin it until it loses all meaning." Lena nodded slowly. "People forget that public narratives meet public records. You can't spin facts." Margot smiled faintly. "That's why I stopped arguing." Instead of engaging with Whitney's circus, Margot did something that didn't require words or public posturing. The next day, she wrote a check to a women's legal aid fund. She donated anonymously, no strings attached, to an organization that helped women in need of legal protection. Women who didn't have the luxury of playing games, whose battles weren't about branding or headlines. It wasn't just the right thing to do. It was her statement. Emily walked into the living room that evening and saw the check receipt lying on the table. She picked it up, scanning the name of the legal fund, then looked over at Margot. "Another silent move?" Emily asked, a grin pulling at the corners of her lips. Margot met her eyes, her expression steady. "Sometimes winning isn't about being loud." "You're winning, all right," Emily said, a note of awe in her voice. "By not playing." Margot's lips curved up slightly. "That's the point." Later that evening, Victor called. He didn't need to ask about the blog post. They both knew why he was calling. "I saw it," he said, his voice low but steady, "and I saw the reply." Margot remained silent for a moment, letting the silence settle between them. "You handled it well," Victor continued. "Your restraint is your loudest move." Margot sat back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. "It's not about volume. It's about control." Victor chuckled softly. "You always were the silent type. Most people mistake that for weakness." "They don't see it as a weapon until it cuts through everything else," Margot said, her voice low and even. Exactly, Victor replied. And if she keeps going, she'll make it easier to show the world what she really is. I'm not waiting for her to reveal herself, Margot said, her tone firm. I'm already on the other side of the truth. As the evening wound down, Emily joined Margot outside on the porch. The moon was full, casting its silver glow across the water. Emily sat next to Margot on the swing, her feet bare against the cool wood. I don't know how you do it, Emily said after a moment of silence. How you just let it all fall apart for her. Like you're not even part of the story anymore. Margot looked out at the lake, the water shifting with the breeze. I'm not. Not the way she wants me to be. That's the difference. Emily looked up at her, understanding finally settling in. You're just letting her be what she is. Margot smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. Exactly. You can't fight someone who's already lost. The letter arrived on a day when the weather finally warmed up enough for the lake to shimmer in full sunlight. Margot had been outside for hours, tending to the garden, and when she came inside for a late lunch, it was waiting for her on the hallway table. An envelope, thin, unadorned, with no return address. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Trey. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she left it there for a while, sitting with it for what felt like too long, watching the light shift across the living room, until the silence between them felt too stretched to ignore. Then quietly, she sat down and tore open the seal. It wasn't long, just a few brief lines, but each one carried a weight that seemed to sink deeper as she read. You were right. I let her turn me into a mirror. I let her twist my perception of you, of everything we were. I blamed you for things you didn't do. I thought I had to protect her, and in doing so, I lost what really mattered. Thank you for protecting Emily when I didn't, for being the one person who stayed steady in the storm. I'll never be able to make up for it, but I can at least say this now, what I should have said a long time ago. You were right, and I'm sorry. Margot read it twice before she folded the letter slowly and placed it in her cedar box, the one she kept tucked under the table in the entryway. She didn't call anyone, didn't show it to Lena. There was no dramatic reading or conversation to be had. Instead, Margot stood, walked to the door, and stepped outside, the quiet of the house settling behind her as she walked along the lake trail. She didn't rush. She never rushed anymore. The trail along the water was worn, the dirt soft beneath her boots. It wound its way through the trees, where the wind rustled gently in the leaves. Margot walked without thinking, the familiar rhythm of the trail soothing her mind. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, and the world around her felt like it had always been this way, still unchanging, a quiet constant. Her footsteps were the only sound. She didn't have to speak. There was no one to answer to, no phone call to make. It was just her, the trail, and the memory of everything that had led her here. She wasn't running from anything anymore. She was simply walking through it. She stopped at the old wooden bench near the water's edge, the one where she had sat with Emily so many years ago, talking about life and the future and the things that always seemed too far off to touch. The same bench that had seen every tear, every quiet laugh, and every unspoken word. Margot sat down, her hands resting in her lap, and closed her eyes for a moment. She didn't cry. She didn't feel the need to. Instead, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace, quiet, complete peace. The kind you earn not by fighting, but by letting go, by understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away, not from the people who hurt you, but from the need to be anything other than yourself. Later that afternoon, Lena arrived at the house with a folder in hand. The papers were final. Everything was in order. The estate filings were complete. Everything was secure. There were no loose ends, no questions left unanswered. The future had been paved with precision, built layer by layer like the house that had stood firm against the storms. Lena set the folder on the kitchen table. She glanced over at Margot, who was leaning against the counter, her gaze distant. It's done, Lena said quietly, her voice soft but steady. Everything is in place. Margot didn't respond immediately. She just smiled faintly, a small, quiet smile that spoke volumes. You did it, Lena said, her voice full of both admiration and something more, maybe awe or maybe understanding. You built peace like a fortress. Margot nodded slowly. Not a fortress, she corrected. A foundation. Fortresses are built to keep things out. Foundations are built to support what's already inside. Lena stood still for a moment, letting Margot's words settle. Then she gave a small, approving nod and turned to leave, but not before pausing at the door. You've earned it, she said softly. Everything you have, everything you are. Margot smiled, a little more openly this time. We all earn our way forward. Lena closed the door behind her, leaving Margot alone in the stillness of the house. The quiet was different now, richer, fuller. She had built something lasting, something solid, and she had done it not with force or power, but with patience and grace. That evening, after the last rays of the sun slipped behind the horizon, Margot sat on the porch again, looking out over the water. The air was cooler now, the breeze picking up slightly. She pulled her sweater tighter around her shoulders and let the stillness fill her. Her phone buzzed from inside the house, but she ignored it. The notifications could wait. The world would still turn, the stories would still unfold. But for now, Margot was content to sit in the quiet of the evening and let it all breathe. The phone rang again the following week, but this time, Margot didn't hesitate to silence it. She already knew who was calling. She'd been asked for an interview, again. A request to share her side of the story, to speak on the record, to explain, to position herself against the narrative that Whitney had spent so long constructing. But Margot wasn't interested. She'd never been interested in reshaping a story that wasn't hers to begin with. Instead, she sent a brief message to the reporter. I've said everything that matters. Let my record speak. And that was the last she heard about it. That morning, she was busy with a different kind of work. The house smelled like coffee, fresh-cut flowers, and the faint tang of toast in the oven. Margot had invited only a few people over, a small gathering of the people who had stayed with her through all the noise, the people who had never asked for a performance. Emily, of course. Lena, who always understood more than she let on. And Victor, who had become not just an advisor, but someone who respected silence as much as he respected the truth. They sat at the table in the kitchen, the four of them, sharing a meal that felt more like a celebration than a farewell. No one had to say it aloud, but they all understood. This was a turning point. Not the end of a journey, but a shift towards something more grounded, more real. Emily had made the centerpieces, small vases filled with lavender and wildflowers from the garden. She'd also made a small plaque that had been placed carefully by the front door. Margot hadn't asked her to. She hadn't needed to, but Emily had always known the right gesture, even when Margot hadn't seen it for herself. On the front porch, above the weathered wood, was a new plaque that read, "The lively house built with grace." Margot stood in the doorway, looking at it, feeling the quiet weight of it settle into her bones. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't asked for it, but it felt right. It was the kind of thing that only made sense when everything else had fallen away. I didn't expect this, Margot said softly, her fingers brushing against the plaque. Emily stood beside her, arms crossed, a grin pulling at the corner of her mouth. It's what you've built, she said. Everything you've done, quietly, without anyone noticing. I think it's about time someone noticed. Margot smiled, her gaze shifting to the horizon, where the lake met the sky in a perfect line. It's the quiet things that last, Em. The loud ones burn out too quickly. Later, after they had eaten and the conversation had meandered from the mundane to the meaningful, Victor leaned back in his chair, his fingers absently tapping the side of his glass. You've built something that isn't just a house, he said, his voice thoughtful. It's a legacy, and unlike what Whitney tried to sell, it's one that isn't up for negotiation. Margot didn't respond immediately. She simply reached for her coffee, taking a slow sip as she let the words sit with her. She didn't need to defend herself anymore. Not to Victor, not to anyone. She had already built her fortress in the quiet moments, in the small acts of kindness, and in the steady rhythm of the life she had cultivated. I used to think that legacy was something you fought for, she said finally, her voice softer than it had been in years. But I've learned it's not about fighting. It's about living, without needing anyone to notice. It's just there. Victor nodded, understanding in his eyes. And you've made it unshakable. Later, when the brunch had ended and the house began to quiet down, Emily and Margot lingered on the porch, The breeze had picked up, rustling the leaves in the trees and sending the wind chimes into a soft, melodic hum. The lake shimmered under the fading sunlight, the world outside still and steady. Emily sat beside her mother, the space between them comfortable, filled only with the sound of nature. "I think you gave me everything," quietly, Emily said, her voice low, almost reverent. "Not just the house or the trust, but everything. The way you let me be me, without ever forcing anything." Margot turned to her daughter, a soft smile pulling at her lips. "I didn't give you anything you didn't already have," she said gently. "You just needed to see it for yourself." Emily reached out, touching her hand lightly. "I'm proud of you, Mom, more than I can say." Margot squeezed her hand, her eyes glinting with something between pride and contentment. "You don't need to say it, I already know." As the evening began to settle into the soft embrace of twilight, there was a quiet knock at the door. Margot stood, wondering who it could be. When she opened it, she saw Trey standing on the porch, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, holding nothing but a simple thank you card. He stood there for a moment, unsure of whether to speak or not. When he did, his voice was small, almost apologetic. "I didn't know what else to do," he said quietly. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything, for taking care of Emily." Margot didn't ask for explanations or apologies. She didn't need them anymore. She simply nodded, taking the card from his hands. It was all that was necessary. Trey lingered for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something more, but nothing came out. He just turned, slowly, and walked away, leaving the past behind him for good.